They didn't run because they stopped wanting you. They ran because wanting you was the most dangerous thing they'd felt in years. That's the part no one prepares you for. Not the silence itself, the silence that arrived right after they made you feel chosen. 1 week they're closer than they've ever been. The next they're gone. No fight, no explanation, just warmth and then a wall. So you're left holding the question that loops at 3 in the morning. Did they ever mean any of it? Was the closeness real, or did I invent the whole thing in my head? I'm going to answer that directly because you've been pulled through enough confusion already. Yes, the connection was real. The warmth was real. The tenderness, the late conversations, the way they looked at you like you were finally the safe one. That was real too, and that is exactly why they disappeared. I need you to hold 2 things at once, because the whole pattern only makes sense when you stop trying to pick between them. The first truth, they felt the bond. The second truth, feeling the bond and being able to keep it, are 2 completely different things. One is emotion, the other is capacity, and a fearful avoidant can be flooded with the first while having almost none of the second. That's the reframe that changes everything, so let me say it without softening it. They didn't run because you meant nothing. They ran because you got close enough to matter. You were not rejected for being defective. You were rejected for being effective, for becoming the one person who actually reached them. And the closer you got, the louder the old alarm in them screamed that something this good was about to cost them everything. Start with the closeness, because that's the part you keep replaying. And you're not replaying it because you're weak. You're replaying it because it was real, and your memory knows it. When a fearful avoidant lets you in, it doesn't look like half an effort. It looks like the most present, most affectionate, most emotionally open person you've ever been with. They can be extraordinary at the start of intimacy. They feel things intensely. They want to be known. The longing in them is genuine. That's why this is so disorienting. You weren't dealing with someone cold. You were dealing with someone warm who then went cold overnight. So here's where most people misread the whole thing. You assumed that someone who could open up like that could also stay open. That was a completely reasonable assumption. But depth is not durability. They could feel the connection. They could not hold it once it became real. So hear this cleanly. You weren't imagining it. You just mistook their ability to feel it for an ability to keep it. Before we go any further, if this is already describing the exact cycle you've been stuck in, take 1 second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It tells me which cases matter most to you, and it makes sure you're here for the ones that come next. And if you leave a comment, tell me this. When they disappeared, what hurt more? The silence itself, or the fact that they made you question whether any of it had been real? Now let's get inside what actually happens to them when you get close, because this is where the pattern stops looking like rejection and starts looking like fear. Here's the second truth, and it's the one that feels insane from the outside. For most people, being loved consistently feels like relief. For a fearful avoidant, being loved consistently feels like the start of a threat. Somewhere back in their history, closeness stopped being safe. Love came with conditions, or with humiliation, or with someone who could be tender one day and cruel the next. They learned, early and deep, that the people who get closest are the ones who can do the most damage, so they grew up running on a single rule. The moment love starts to feel real, start watching for the catch. This is the only place I'll put it in these exact terms. Their nervous system never learned that love means comfort. It learned that love means exposure, and exposure means risk. So when you started loving them well, they didn't relax. They scanned. They watched for the hidden cost. They braced for the version of you that would eventually turn the kindness into control. They waited for the betrayal they were sure was coming, because in their experience, it always had. And this is the part that breaks the anxious mind in half. The exact things you did to build trust were the exact things that set off the alarm. The caring text after a hard day, the honest confession about how you felt, the soft look across the room, the weekend that felt unusually close, where for once nothing was performed. To a secure person, those are the bricks you build safety out of. To them, every one of those felt like the sound of a trap quietly closing. So let me say it plainly. Your love didn't fail because it was too weak. It frightened them because it was getting too close. And that tells you exactly when they run. Not after a fight, after a good day. They disappear after the deep conversation, after the vulnerable night, after the moment the future suddenly felt possible, after the moment they caught themselves starting to need you. The fearful avoidant runs at the precise moment you think the relationship is finally becoming secure. You felt the wall coming down. They felt more exposed than they could stand, and every instinct they owned told them to rebuild it before it was too late. Which brings us to the silence, and to the biggest mistake people make about what it means. You're picturing them calm, relieved, moving on, barely thinking about you while you fall apart. Let me offer you a more accurate picture, not to feed your hope, but because the truth here actually changes how you carry this. No contact is not peace for them. From the outside they look cold and settled. Inside they are at war. One part misses you. Another part is terrified of you. One part drafts the message. Another part deletes it before it sends. One part wants the connection back so badly it aches. Another part remembers exactly why closeness felt dangerous and slams the door again. They check your profile and hate themselves for checking. They reread old messages. They ask a mutual friend how you're doing and pretend it's a passing thought. They convince themselves they're better off alone, and then the ache returns at midnight and dismantles the whole argument. I want you to hear both halves of this, because only one of them helps you. Yes, that conflict means you mattered. People don't go to war inside themselves over someone who meant nothing. But no, that conflict does not mean they're ready, and it is not a runway to them coming back able to stay. Their inner chaos is evidence that you got in. It is not evidence that they can let you stay. And this is where the injury gets worse. They do not just leave you. They build a story where leaving you was reasonable, because nobody runs this hard without a story that justifies it. In the quiet, they start rewriting what happened. It was too intense. It was moving too fast. We were incompatible. They needed too much. I felt trapped. It would never have worked. I'm better on my own. I don't even want a relationship right now. And if you are anxiously attached, this is the part that can make you feel insane. Because now you are not only grieving the relationship, you are grieving the version of events they seem to have invented to survive their own guilt. Some of those lines hold fragments of truth, but they are armor. They turn something terrifying into something rational, because it is so much easier to say, "This was too much," than to admit, "This mattered so much that I panicked and bolted." It's easier to call you needy than to face their own fear of being needed. It's easier to decide the whole thing was unsafe than to admit that being loved well was the unfamiliar thing they couldn't tolerate. So when you hear, secondhand, the cold little summary they've given of you and the relationship, read it for what it is. This is not them finally discovering the truth. This is them negotiating with guilt. The story they tell about you isn't the truth. It's the shield that protects them from how much they actually felt. And then comes the part that steals months from people. Just when you've started to steady yourself, the breadcrumb arrives. A random like, a story view, a hope you're okay out of nowhere, a nostalgic line at 1 a.m, a message that cracks the door open emotionally and then refuses to walk through it. And every time, your whole system lights up, because you've been starving for a sign that any of it was real. That is why the breadcrumb is so dangerous. It does not arrive as cruelty, it arrives as possibility. But let me tell you what that crumb is. It is not repair, it is a low-risk test. They are checking whether the connection is still warm, whether you are still reachable, whether they can get reassurance without facing the actual conversation, the actual accountability, the actual discomfort of staying. Here's the line I want you to keep. A breadcrumb can feel like proof when you're starving for clarity, but starvation is exactly what makes a crumb feel like a meal. There is a difference between desire and repair, and a fearful avoidant in conflict will hand you the first, while avoiding the second every single time. Desire is them missing you, watching from a distance, feeling nostalgic, wanting the warmth back, imagining a reunion in their head. All of that can be completely real, and none of it asks them to change a single thing. Repair is different. Repair is them naming what actually went wrong without you dragging it out of them. It is consistency after contact instead of another vanish. It is respecting your boundaries. It is visible change in behavior, not just a softer tone. So hold this, even when the crumb is sweet. Missing you is not the same as being ready to love you properly. Longing isn't repair. Regret isn't repair. Watching your life from across the internet isn't repair. Repair asks for the one thing they've spent their whole life avoiding, staying present when it gets uncomfortable. And if nothing in them actually changes, you already know how this ends. Warmth, closeness, fear, withdrawal, silence, longing, shame. A story that makes the leaving make sense. A breadcrumb, a flicker of hope. Closeness again, fear again, gone again. Until the fear underneath it is faced, the same pattern just runs on a loop, and a new chance only buys you another lap. And this is where I want to turn the camera around, because we've spent long enough inside their head. While they were running, you were doing the thing anxious attachment always does. You went looking for the flaw in yourself. I was too much. I scared them off. I should have needed less. I should have been easier to love. I'm not going to mock those thoughts, because I know where they come from. Self-blame feels like control. If you can find the precise thing you did wrong, then you can promise yourself it will never happen again. But look at the cost of it. Self-blame gives you the illusion of control, and in return, it makes you responsible for a wound you didn't create. So let me take that weight off you directly. Their disappearance does not prove you were too much. It proves they couldn't tolerate being truly seen. It proves they couldn't carry the weight of staying. It proves their fear was louder than their want. Their silence felt like a verdict on your worth. It was only ever a readout of their limits. So here's where I want to leave you, and it's a long way from where you started. You came in asking, did they ever care? It's the right question for where you were standing, but I want you to outgrow it, because that question keeps all the power in their hands. Move from, did they ever care, to, could they actually show up? Then to, what would I need to see before I trusted this person again? And then to the question that genuinely sets you free. Do I want a love that only feels real when it's being pulled away from me? Because the strongest version of this doesn't end with, they secretly wanted me. That's still you waiting to be chosen. The strongest version ends with this. Even if they did want me, I still don't have to abandon myself for someone who can't stay. You are not defined by whether they miss you. You are not defined by whether they come back. You are not defined by whether they ever finally admit the connection was real. Your growth was never going to be proven by getting them to choose you. It's proven the moment you stop treating someone else's fear as the final word on your worth. So let me give you the last thing plainly, the way I gave you the first. The question is no longer whether they wanted you. The question is whether wanting you was ever enough, because a fearful avoidant runs at the exact moment love becomes real. That doesn't make you unlovable. It means you reach the part of them that's most afraid of being loved. Their fear was never your flaw, and their silence was never your sentence. I have been the Relationship Detective, and thank you for watching. If this helped you see things more clearly, please give it a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. I wish everyone watching all the best, and I hope to see you again in the next one.